And the problem is, if you wait for many years or a decade or two, in that time you have numerous casualties, which are most of those are totally avoidable.
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the Transport Podcast. I'm Christian Walmar, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, we've got a mixed bag today, I think.
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. Yes, we have an interview-packed episode of Calling All Stations for our listeners on this occasion. We have 3 interviews coming up, and later in this episode, we'll be hearing from the Policy Director of Railfuture about that organisation's vision for Great British Railways. We'll also be hearing from the retiring Director of the Transport Action Network on how sustainable transport policies are so desperately needed for this country. But we're kicking off with a discussion between yourself and Leo Murray, who runs a company called Riding Sunbeams, which is trying to decarbonise Britain's railways by connecting the system to sustainable energy sources. And here's your conversation with Leo.
I'm with Leo Murray, the founder of Riding Sunbeams, who has a plan to make the electricity supply of the rail industry far more sustainable and indeed cheaper. So, Leo, can you just briefly explain the background to this and how you hope that the electricity supply can be made both more sustainable and cheaper?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And thanks for having me on, Kristen. So a few years ago, in my role as Director of Innovation at the climate charity Possible, I was supporting a community energy group to try to find somewhere to connect a solar farm in or around their village of Balcombe. And we couldn't find anywhere with a grid connection.
Balcombe, where there is a famous...
where there's a famous viaduct, actually. And one of the sites we looked at was right next to the railway, and on the other side of the fence, we could see a big 3-phase connection. And we were like, why can we not connect into that? Anyway, I then got some money from the UK Innovation Agency.
So the idea was, you thought, why can't we just generate electricity and basically power the railway?
That's it. So instead of connecting your solar farm to the grid, you simply take a wire and connect it to the railway instead,
right?
Which is a very big electricity user. You know, railways in the UK use more electricity than anyone else. About 2% of all power demand in the UK goes to move trains.
Which cost Network Rail...
23, 24, they paid £1 billion in electricity bills. And, those prices have gone up massively in recent years, whereas the cost of solar power has gone down. It just keeps on going down, right? It's one of the great success stories.
Right. So this is a simple idea. Why can't they, there's plenty of places they could have solar farms next to the railway. Why not power it? So what's the problem?
So we did a demonstrator project, actually. So we did a technical demonstrator working with Network Rail Southern Region as a brilliant engineers down there. And you can still see that pilot scheme from one end of the platform at Aldershot Station in Hampshire. We have a small 40 kilowatt peak array in a railway siding. It's not connected to the grid. It goes straight into an auxiliary transformer in the back of a traction substation. So if you catch a train through Aldershot Station on a sunny afternoon, a tiny bit of the power that is moving that train is coming from our solar.
Oh, right. Exciting.
Right. So we did a technical demonstrator and years ago it worked, and it actually worked better than that.
How long ago was this?
2019 we commissioned that.
Right.
So one might ask, well, if it's such a good idea, why has this not happened at scale since then? And what I've come to realize is that it was the dysfunctional structure of the rail sector in the UK where you just had misaligned commercial incentives. So although we showed, and this has been true for years, that connecting solar directly to power railways would save railways a lot of money in electricity bills, right?
Yeah.
It's about a third cheaper, right, than grid supply power, and save lots of carbon as well. And of course, we're all trying to achieve climate change goals. So why would you not then do this at scale?
So why didn't Network Rail grab at the opportunity?
Exactly. And the answer is that Network Rail do not pay the electricity bills for traction. So traction is electricity that's used to move trains, right? And Network Rail, although they buy all the electricity for moving trains, they then sell it on to train operating companies
At the same price.
at the same price.
So
Regulations, it has to be the same price. They can't make money on it.
Right.
So zero commercial incentive for Network Rail to actually do this. But they're the ones who would have to do it. So the train operating companies are the ones who would save the money, but Network Rail is the ones who have to make it happen. And consequently, nothing has happened.
Right.
And, this is even true for simpler propositions like just putting solar on station roofs. Why is there almost no solar on station roofs in the UK? And the answer is that rooftop solar at that kind of scale, commercial rooftop solar, takes about 7 to 10 years to pay back.
And the franchises were 7 to 10 years.
Exactly.
Although there is an exception, Leo. Blackfriars is full of them. Isn't it?
That's right. So Blackfriars Station had solar integrated from the outset. So when the station rebuild happened, solar was baked into the rebuild. So that's almost the only places you'll find solar on any railway buildings in the UK is where it was built in from the outset.
Okay. So Network Rail were not interested in your idea.
Well, the engineers were interested, the sustainability guys were interested, but commercial stopped it from proceeding, essentially, because there just wasn't a business case for doing it, right? If you were Network Rail, you'd be the liability holder, so it'd be your responsibility, all the risk associated with doing something new and difficult like this, innovative. But they wouldn't have got the benefits. The benefits would have gone to private train operating companies.
Right.
But now the Great British Railways reforms, what they mean is the train operating companies are being folded back in to the public sector. So
this provides an opportunity. This is something we haven't heard any politicians say about. Oh, here's the source of opportunity. So this is exciting.
Yeah. So it's not the most. It's maybe not the biggest of the implications of the Great British Rail reforms, right? But our idea, which on paper, pencils out extremely well, and technically we've showed that it works. Now there's a commercial case for doing it, and I very much expect this to happen.
Why? Because it's all integrated. Because it'll be all integrated.
Up until now, private train operating companies have been responsible for paying the traction electricity bills. So Network Rail procures the electricity on their behalf and actually supplies it through grid supply points, but then bills the train operating companies, who have meters on the trains, right? And they haven't been allowed to add a profit to that. And consequently, there's been no incentive for Network Rail to reduce the price of that electricity because they aren't the ones who are paying the bills.
Right.
What will happen under GBR is, on a regional basis, the train operating company that runs the services will be part of the same business that is managing the infrastructure. So effectively, the landlord, formerly Network Rail, and the tenant, formerly train operating companies, will be part of the same business, right? So the landlord and the tenant become the same entity
with the same profit and loss
account. Exactly, with the same profit and loss account, or at least on a virtual basis.
Right.
And so suddenly it's in everybody's interests. So it's in everybody's interest to procure cheap traction electricity, but also doing things like putting solar on station roofs, depot roofs, that won't be affected by short-term franchising.
Right.
Solar takes a while to pay back. And so all of these kinds of, there is now a business case to make these investment decisions. And there is a very well-established model in the market where GBR will not have to spend its own money on building these solar farms, right? Developers will be able to do that, and they'll just contract to buy the electricity over very long periods of time. So the life of the asset, essentially. So you sign a 25-year deal to buy electricity at a much cheaper per kilowatt hour price then they can buy it from the grid.
Right. And is this starting to happen? Has Network Rail woken up to this fact? And ministers woken up to this fact?
So far, the first kind of directly buying power from a renewable energy generator happened last year, and that was through what's called a corporate sleeved PPA with EDF Renewables.
PPA?
Yeah, power purchase agreement. So that is a deal to buy all the electricity that a new generating asset is producing. So EDF Renewables has built a 49.9 megawatt peak solar farm in Norfolk, and Network Rail are the exclusive off-takers for that. So they buy all of the electricity that's coming from that solar farm. But that is not built next to the railway. It's not connected via a private wire straight into the railway. That's being delivered over the grid.
It goes into the grid.
So it goes into the grid.
That's not quite your idea.
No.
Yeah.
But it is still coming at a discount to the price that Network Rail is paying today. So that is one way to buy the power. But the best way and the cheapest way to buy renewable energy is to generate it right next to where the demand is.
Right.
So if you have a grid supply point that's supplying traction power to the network, you can build a solar farm next to that, literally just connect it with a wire and supply solar behind the meter, right? So essentially, this will just mean that Network Rail is importing less electricity from the grid.
Right.
So that's basically the way that it works. It will just drastically reduce their bills from their main supply contract, and they'll be buying electricity at a much lower per kilowatt hour price, which is important because one of the things that's happened over recent years, so since we did our demonstrator project, electricity has become much more expensive. Now, everybody, listeners will know this because all of our electricity is about much more expensive, but households are subject to a price cap, whereas industrial users have no such thing, right? And so Network Rail today, in this control period, the 5-year control periods that govern their spending, they're paying 50% more per unit of electricity than they were in the last control period. And that has had huge knock-on effects on Network Rail budgets for maintenance and renewals. You know, it's been a really big problem. So there are huge incentives now for them to try to reduce those costs. So electricity is very expensive. And what's also happened in the last sort of 5-6 years, solar power has got much cheaper, and it only goes in one direction. So the difference between the price it's possible to generate solar electricity at and the price Network Rail is paying for grid supply power is now huge. So there's lots of savings available to the railways and profits available to developers for building these assets.
So are we going to see lots of solar farms popping up next to the railway?
So I would be amazed if we don't. I think that, we aren't now. The UK was originally leading on this, right, but the Belgian infrastructure operator, Infrabel, they are planning a 2 megawatt pilot solar farm supplying one of the high speed lines to go live hopefully in 2026. And that will be the first of a program of these things being built across the high speed network. And the Eurotunnel on the French side are in the process now of building a solar farm around the tunnel portal on the French side.
Why not the English side?
Well, the guys who are running the project, they told me they hadn't even done an English press release for this project because they find it difficult to deal with the guys on the British side of the channel.
Yeah, but yes.
But look, this is happening, and it's happening for sound business reasons as well as sustainability reasons, right?
Right.
It's going to save everybody. It's either going to save money, make money, and it's going to reduce carbon. So it's contributing. The railways are the biggest electricity user in the country,
yeah,
and them taking this up at scale will make a actually really big contribution to our national targets for rolling out renewable energy. One of the big problems for meeting those targets today is that we don't have the grid capacity to accept new solar farms and wind farms being built all over the place. It's very difficult to get a connection. So if you're a developer and you want to build a solar or wind farm, you propose one today,
yeah,
you will join a queue for connections. That means you won't get a grid connection until the back end of the 2030s. Right.
So there's no point doing it. The economics doesn't work.
It's very, very difficult to make money that way, right? Whereas the railways are right there, using all of this electricity, and they've now got, because of the GBR reforms, they've now got a good reason they've got a business case for actually buying power in this way.
And I think you said your idea has been picked up as far away as India.
Yes, it has. So I discovered recently that we were the direct inspiration behind India's demonstrator project at a place called Bina in Madhya Pradesh. They have a 1.7 megawatt peak solar farm, which is directly supplying a traction substation via private wire. And of course, India's railways are, unlike ours, 100% electrified. I mean, 99.4% at last count, right? They've done the whole broad gauge network. And they did about half of that they did in 5 years, in the last 5 years. On an average day in 2022-23, Indian Railways electrified more route kilometres of railway than the UK electrified in the whole year, 2023. Not even a good day, Christian, just an average day, right? An average day on Indian Railways, they electrified more route.
It's slightly out of our subject here, but it is a depressing thing to hear, that sort of thing. I am well aware.
But it's why we've hired someone in India, right? So we just opened an office in Delhi.
Very good to hear that, across the world, this sort of idea has been picked up. So thank you so much, Leah. That is really interesting. And maybe I understand there's some projects that you can't talk about yet, but you might invite me to the opening of these projects when they start happening.
Yes,
I'll be very excited to hear more about this because, it's exactly the sort of benefits that GBR should bring. And also it's very important environmentally. So it's win-win.
Thanks so much, Christian. I look forward to that as well.
Pleasure.
One of the very distinguished roles that Christian carries out is serving as honorary president of an organisation called Railfuture, which, as the name implies, campaigns for investment in and improvements to the rail network in Great Britain. Recently, Railfuture held a parliamentary reception to launch a new report called A Growth Opportunity for Railways, which is intended to promote the opportunities created through the establishment of Great British Railways and the Railways Bill currently making its way through the UK Parliament to bring that organisation into being. Christian had a chat with Ian Brown, who is the policy director of Railfuture and also has had and continues to have a distinguished career in the rail industry in his own right. And here's Christian's conversation with Ian.
I'm with Ian Brown, who's the policy director of Railfuture. And we've just been at a parliamentary reception organised by Railfuture, partly to launch its new document about how it wants to see the railways going, but also merely as a way of kind of contacting various MPs, and the turnout was indeed excellent. So, Ian, tell me about what the point of this meeting was.
I think, Christian, the point of the meeting was that we think in Railfuture that the industry perfectly understands how to run a decent railway with proper investment. It understands the issues about track and train, about fragmentation, all those things. But the question is, why doesn't it respond to that? And the reason it doesn't respond to that is the objectives of the industry are much wider than just running a few trains, and they're not overtly stated. So we think that the bill should actually be tested
The railways bill.
should actually be tested against achievement of these objectives. The objectives in the area of social inclusion, the economy particularly, and the environment.
But you're saying that the railways have too narrow focus, but surely this is something for the government, and that's what Great British Railways will be doing, isn't it?
Well, it should do it, but a lot of the discussion is fixing the day job,
Right.
about reliability and fragmentation.
Right.
But there really is an opportunity to get these wider benefits from railways. The only way to get the benefits from these benefits is to get more of them, i.e. a bigger railway. That's why we think we need a bigger railway.
What do you mean by a bigger railway?
Twice as many people using it.
Right.
100% increase in passengers and freight, not 75% over 10 years.
Right.
And to plan for that in a very logical way. So we put a 6-point plan forward to start.
So what are the key points?
Well, the first one's customers. The industry comes from the fact that customers have been ignored. Customers haven't been ignored, but it's not focused on customers. The industry has actually grown traffic since privatisation by 112%. So how can you say customers have been ignored? Loads more customers. But the answer is you can do a lot more.
But yes, I mean, my feeling on the railways is sometimes they're just not thinking of the customer experience, like all these announcements kind of drowning out, kind of messy kind of platforms, kind of, a whole kind of feeling of slight neglect. Is that what you're talking about?
I think also the fact that nobody makes a station-to-station journey. You make a journey by transport. You walk to a station, you go on a bus. You don't just go on a train. And so you've got to think of the journey. You can't cross the road outside my station locally. You come
Which station is that?
Greenwich. The road is appalling. That sort of thing. So you've got to start thinking about what does the customer actually want.
Okay.
Announcements driving a distraction on Thameslink with 44 stations, that sort of stuff. It's not on. And it's basically, the railway does what the contract says.
Right.
It empties the dustbins on a Friday with a green dustbin bag.
It doesn't do the extra.
It doesn't do the extra.
Okay. So what are your other things?
So basically, having customers, you then got ticketing and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Everybody knows about simplicity, but the key question on ticketing is the price level.
Right.
Now, if you are pricing a passenger service, the service loses money, it gets subsidy.
Yeah.
So what should the ticket price be? Should it be to maximise traffic? Should it be to maximise income? Or should it be to maximise the benefits to the system? And are the benefits to the system more than the subsidy? If they are, you should be doing subsidies. It's a good example is this freedom pass for all people.
Yeah.
The national health benefit more by people being healthy mentally, by meeting people, by physically, by walking around using a freedom pass and public transport, saving money for national health, but it costs the transport industry.
But nobody looks at things like that.
No, they should.
Right.
If transport is part of that equation.
Okay.
Service quality, basically, it's about we don't worry about service quality. It's about compensation. Get compensation from the TOCs, get compensation from Network Rail. Fine, and we pass some of it on to the passengers to keep the rest. The worse the service is, the better we are. That's not on the way of running a railway.
Right.
The other thing is to actually even it out, wobbling around north of England at 40 mile an hour in a 40-year-old DMU compared with
Diesel multiple unit.
is not on. Not really.
Right.
Because you don't get the benefits.
Right. I mean, they're addressing that with things like the Northern Powerhouse Rail and Transpennine upgrade.
It hasn't got the rolling stock. It should have. But yeah. So that's another one. The other one's efficiency. So much we reckon that about the industry is about 30% more expensive than it should be because of everybody doing trades internally. Instead of just having the customer, you've got all the internal customers, blah, blah, blah.
But that Great British Railways will address, won't it?
It's going to address that.
Right.
But the really thing to address in terms of that is volume. If you could double the number of passengers on the railway and freight, but not double the cost, i.e. the cost goes up with that,
Right.
the efficiency gets spades faster than just trying to cut costs.
Right. But if you have twice as many people, you're going to need more train to do. There will be cost increases.
Yeah, but not as much as 100%. That's the argument.
Right.
There was a study called Dovey Junction and Clapham Junction to compare the two
Right.
in terms of efficiency, which is the most efficient.
Right.
You'd think Clapham Junction, because of its volume, would be higher, but we haven't got the economies of scale on the railway. The busier it is, the more cost we put in.
Dovey Junction was more efficient.
Yes, more
Whether it's in the middle of nowhere.
yes. But that one passenger was more efficient. Sorry. So efficiency basically is about volume on the railway. The other one that we really, really want to go for is devolution.
Right.
I've worked for London, of course, done Crossrail, the Overground, that sort of stuff. Manchester want to do it. West Midland wants to do it. There is pushback from government,
Right.
which under GBR
So
is
they want to do what exactly?
we want
They
to,
want to have control of their local railway.
just like by working in Toronto, in Canada, the people have moved out of the centre. They want more transport. National Rail is the bit to do it. You've got the trams in the middle. You need, just like the Overground in London.
Right.
So devolution, you need to control the local railways around London. Can that be done whilst keeping a national network? The answer is yes. Can you get a lot more out of the national network rather than just do a specification, send it off to the DFT,
Right.
who know about more than that?
So that would actually be handing over suburban services in a lot of these places.
Yeah, in a control way.
In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
in a controlled way where the infrastructure, the rules of access are clear. In other words, you're not. We used to think I would, with the overground, stop any express train running into London from Kent.
Right.
That's not about that,
Right.
because London needs the economy of Kent to come in, of course. So that,
But
that's
don't the
one.
passenger transport authorities or executives, whatever they're called now, do that to some extent?
They do a specification. They say we'd like a half-hour train service.
Right.
Full stop.
But they don't actually run the trains or
No.
are responsible for
No.
Right. Okay.
So we think they should. And the last one, of course, is a funding issue, which I think is everybody's on. It's got to be continuous. It's got to be based on, talking to our friends from Derby, for instance, the economy of the country depends to some extent, varying, like Derby, massive, some places small, on the railway. So having an investment situation in the railway is key to this, and the supply chain. The Derby case is not how many people work at Alstom, whether it closes or not. It's whether it closes and then takes the supply chain out.
But you're just asking for more money. Everybody asks for more money.
No, we're not asking for more money. We're asking for a profile of money to deliver some of these objectives. Not 45 billion, particularly for Northern Powerhouse, which is not a number anyway,
Right.
but to try and have something you can plan on and actually deliver in a continuous way so that the benefits start getting put back into it.
Right.
To keep the money supply going.
Okay.
So otherwise, if you just ask for money, they're going to say no.
Right, absolutely. So just to finish off, do you think that Great British Railways will bring about an improvement and gives potential for more improvement?
I think fixing the day job, i.e. make it work, is a starting point.
Yeah.
The key challenge is, can we make the railway an instrument of addressing these big initiatives that the government want to do, such as the economy in particular? If we do that, it can be a fabulous success. The railway management are perfectly capable of getting on with it if they're told what they want from them.
Right.
So get on with it, folks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you.
In a previous episode of Calling All Stations, Christian spoke to Chris Todd, the director of Transport Action Network, which is an organisation campaigning in the UK for investment in sustainable travel, such as buses, railways and active travel, in preference to major new road schemes. Chris recently announced that he's standing down as director of Transport Action Network, and so Christian took the opportunity to talk to Chris about his reflections on his time in his role and what the future of transport policy in the UK might be.
I'm with Chris Todd of the Transport Action Network, and we're going to talk about the departure of Nick Harris, who is in charge of National Highways, and then also cover the work of Transport Action Network as Chris is leaving for other climes. So, Chris, welcome to Calling All Stations. You've been on it once before, I think. But I really want to talk to you about the news about the fact that National Highways is going to have a new director. And just so tell me a bit about the record of Nick Harris there and controversies and so on about National Highways.
I think if we leave Nick Harris aside for the moment, I think, and focus on, the record of National Highways, because I think there's been a lot being said in recent weeks about his success, etc. But, to be fair to him, he inherited an organisation that was a basket case. It's failing on so many levels.
In what way? So,
well, if you take things like air pollution, for example, there's still 15 sections of the strategic roads network that are failing air quality standards, legal standards that should have been met nearly 20 years ago. It's record on road safety. It's failing on the target. It's continued to failing, and the government's response is to slacken the target for next time round. Basically, the National Highways has failed to sort of reduce the number of incidents and deaths and serious casualties on the road sufficiently, and basically it's flatlined and has.
But what levers does it have in its powers to reduce casualties? How would it go about doing that?
I think, to be fair, perhaps to the government, in the last year or so, it has been focusing more on targeting some of the most seriously dangerous roads in its network. But that has come about at the very last minute, if you like. And that's what it needs to be doing. It's one of its tricks, if you like, has been to not tackle road danger on the network, particularly if it's a stretch of road that it wants to upgrade to a dual carriageway. And so it tends to not act to reduce the casualties because that gives it a stronger reason to upgrade the road to something bigger. And we've seen that with the A66, where there were opportunities. And, Keith Buchan did a report for us showing what could be done for very modest sums of a few £1 million to help reduce immediately casualties. But this has been going on for decades. And so you've had these casualties over decades, and the local communities, quite rightly, have been screaming for something to be done about it. And then National Highways is able to turn around and say, well, if you all support our dual carriageway, we'll be able to solve all of the safety issues.
I see. So they go for the bigger, very expensive long-term plan, but don't take the smaller measure. Well, what sort of smaller measures are you talking about there?
Well, it can be something as basic as a white line. It could be expanding the space at a junction. It could be putting an average speed limit over a comprehensive section of the route. It could be improving visibility. There's a whole range of things. You could even separate the two carriageways slightly with some sort of central barrier.
Right.
It depends what the issue is at a particular section of road. You could potentially straighten out some very wiggly.
So in other words, there's lots of cheap options that you could do rather than waiting for the big improvement.
Yeah, and the problem is if you wait for many years or a decade or two, in that time you have numerous casualties, which are most of those are totally avoidable.
So there are particular sections of road that we know that are dangerous that they're not doing anything about. Is that basically the failure?
That has been historic. I said recently, in the last year or two, there has been a bit of a move to start to tackle those, and I think that's come about from perhaps Lillian Greenwood's influence in the department. But I mean, otherwise it hasn't. Yes, it has generally ignored that. And if you look at, say, road danger to people who are walking and cycling, then it is not really acting very quickly on that either.
Right. And on pollution, again, how does the road manager, which is the National Highways, work out how to reduce pollution in a particular section? How would that work?
I mean, ultimately, it comes down to traffic levels. And if you're always building stuff and encouraging more traffic onto the route, then it's always going to be very difficult to tackle air pollution. You can put up barriers to a degree to stop the pollution spilling into neighbouring areas. I'm not sure how successful that is. You can change the speed limits because petrol and diesel engines are more efficient around 50, 55 miles an hour than they are at 70 or 80. And you can work with big traffic generators or destinations to draw up some sort of travel program to get people to change their travel behaviors, whether it's changing when they drive or whether it's encouraging them to walk, cycle or use public transport instead. And National Highways, I think it was Highways England at the time, did have successful trials of that over in Kent quite a long time ago now, where they worked with big businesses like Pfizer to reduce the impact that they had on the strategic.
I remember that. Yes, but you mean that hasn't been rolled out in other places?
No, and it's a very good way of managing demand, of reducing congestion on the network without having to have very expensive and damaging road expansions.
So with a new director, presumably coming along, do you think National Highways can move towards these type of policies?
There's the potential to, but I fear is that it's not all within National Highways' gift. I don't think it does itself any favours. And stuff around, things like active travel don't help in what it's doing. But a lot of what it does is because of the political pressure put on it by ministers, and they are always wanting, so it seems, bigger roads, and as many big roads as possible. And of course, if you keep doing that, so you keep pouring all the money into bigger roads, you don't actually tackle the problems that the network is facing. You might, to some extent, cure a particular bottleneck or issue, but you probably then release it and create further bottlenecks in other parts of the network. You certainly don't solve the air pollution, the noise pollution, and other aspects of it.
So there's a new I mean, has the Labour government not kind of shown any interest in this sort of stuff? I mean, you hinted that Lillian Greenwood, the Minister for Roads, has maybe responded to some extent, or do you think they're still hooked on this roads agenda?
I think they're very much hooked on the roads agenda. And I don't think it's all within the DfT. I think a lot of this is coming from the Treasury. And if you look at the decision on the Lower Thames crossing, I think a lot of people felt it was such a ridiculous amount of money. How can it possibly be affordable or go ahead? And yet they've jumped on it and claiming it's some sort of saviour for growing the economy and everything else in the world.
This is a mega scheme we've discussed before about crossing lower down the Thames, which the latest estimate seems to be 9 billion, 10 billion or something like that.
They've admitted 11 billion and we've
gone up, right?
Yeah, we predicted 12 and they've still got time to reach that. Yeah.
Right. But let's just go back to the Labour government. Okay, that was one bad decision, but you don't think they're taking sufficient interest in the sort of things that we've just discussed about improving dangerous bits of road and reducing pollution and that's you think they're not paying much attention to that?
No, if you look at what's happening on the network, I mean, the figures are not looking good in terms of levels of congestion and, delays on the network. And that's despite them focusing on trying to build their way out of the problem. And unless and until we get ministers who realise we just haven't got enough money to build our way out of this problem of too many vehicles on the roads creating too much congestion, then we're never going to actually solve the problems and tackle the issues. I mean, the Smart Motorways programme, for example, was their solution to try and increase capacity on the cheap. And look how that's turned out.
Well, tell me how it's turned out. How did it turn out?
Well, I mean, I think if you talk to the AA or the RAC, they absolutely hate them. Drivers fear them. They were promised, the 9 worst performing ones claimed they're going to deliver £7 billion in benefits for the country, for the economy. They've actually lost £400 million. And that's before you count in the £1 billion that's been spent trying to add in all these extra refuges because they're so far apart on these smart motorways, people can't actually reach them.
So basically, as I understand it, the problem with the smart motorways was they weren't smart enough. They kind of tried to do it on the cheap without sufficient refuges and without sufficient kind of control. Is that right?
Yeah, because the first trial worked reasonably well. I think on the M42 it was, and it had lower speed limits, and the hard shoulder was only used at extreme periods. They then discarded all the benefits and the evidence from that, and as you say, did it on the cheap, and then wondered why it's all gone terribly wrong, and people don't like it.
Because it hasn't reduced congestion, it has caused more accidents.
In some instances, it's led to more delays.
Oh, really?
Yes. The thing about the safety is that if you put all of that tech onto a standard motorway, it would end up as safe, if not safer, than a smart motorway. But it's the removal of the hard shoulder that people then can't escape in many instances. And what happens is the safety overall can still be about the same or better than a standard motorway with no tech on it. But the danger of you stopping in a live lane and having a crash and suffering injury actually increases on a smart motorway. And that, of course, is quite a terrifying thought.
I just a wave of terror overtook me just as you mentioned that. The idea of breaking down in a motorway with cars going up at 60 miles an hour past you was just quite terrifying.
Yeah, and I think, no amount of sort of looking at statistics and trying to make out that smart motorways are safer than a standard motorway when people can't escape a live lane breakdown. I don't think it's an immediate reaction, isn't it? You would not want to be caught out that way.
Okay, so we've had successive governments which have placed their emphasis on smart motorways, on building more roads, on basically trying to speed up the network, and that has failed. So, as Transport Action Network, what would you like to see from a minister, and what are our chances of seeing that from a Labour minister?
The simple thing is that we should be standing back, or government should be standing back and looking at what is the main aim of this. Is it about moving lots of individual metal boxes around as fast as possible, or is it actually moving people who are more important? And if you start looking at it through a people-centric way, then actually you start looking at what are the more efficient ways of moving people, and that quite often comes down to public transport. So what we'd like to see is much more focus at looking at, some of these tricky sections of road. I mean, what are they going to do around the M25? And, that you can't easily build more road there. So you've got to be looking at public transport solutions, which can shift vast numbers of people quite quickly if you want to, keep that connectivity and keep the economy moving. You've also got issues such as, with the Southwest, for example, where, their main public transport link is sort of clinging on by its fingernails at Dawlish. The government has cancelled the latest work down there. It says it has.
So Dawlish is in this famous kind of place where the railway goes next to the sea and keeps on getting washed over.
Yeah. And it needs, Cornwall needs a second line into the Southwest, needs a second route. And just relying on that and not investing in that and just keep building bigger roads all the time is not going to solve the problems, because it's just going to encourage more people to drive to Cornwall when Cornwall and Devon are already overloaded in the summer with all these cars trying to park everywhere, and you can't get down the narrow lanes because they can't get past each other. And it's just sort of, we don't seem to work backwards. We've got, obesity epidemic in the country. We've got issues around mental health. We've got huge numbers of people with transport-related, suffering from transport-related social exclusion because they don't have any means of travelling around. And this is work that Transport for the North have done. And there's millions and millions of people. And investing more in active travel and public transport would actually tackle all of those issues in terms of making people with access to car able to then move around and engage in the economy, more people walking, cycling, fitter, healthier, happier, without having to spend on expensive gym memberships or, something I just find too boring to want to go and do. And I imagine most people do.
I've never belonged to a gym, but I did go for a run this morning. Yes, much cheaper. And you're, you founded Transport Action Network, is that right?
Yes, back in 2019. I used to work for Campaign for Better Transport.
Right. And in that time, you've developed these ideas of kind of creating a kind of different type of attitude towards transport. Is that fair?
I'd say we've promoted it. I wouldn't say we created it. I think there's an awful lot of commentators, politicians and academics and professionals who have been advocating this sort of approach for a very long time. I think we're just the latest in the line of people who are doing it. It makes sense at a strategic level to be standing back and going, how do we tackle all of these problems, rather than just sort of, this is what we've always done, pile the money into road building,
Yes.
and then scratch our heads pondering, why can't we solve all of these other issues? Or then trying to chase afterwards and solve them very expensively.
I mean, of course, as somebody who's written about this stuff for the last 30 years, I'm obviously on side about this. And it's interesting you say there are quite a lot of people who get it, but there's still an overall culture whereby those obvious solutions are not addressed. We've got Active Travel England, we've got kind of various bodies kind of supporting this, but we don't seem to have changed the central ethos. Is that probably the problem?
Yeah, I think it's a bit like there's been a lot of talk about changing the Green Book, and it's going to allow more schemes to happen. And
The Green Book, which is to assess how schemes are funded and stuff in the Treasury.
Yeah, but I mean, effectively, that was abused previously. It will be abused again, just to deliver what the politicians want, and they'll just justify it in different ways. They're still not really standing back and saying, what are the big issues? How can we join this up holistically? I mean, when Labour came into power, I think there was a huge amount of hope that they would do things differently. That's what they claimed they would do. You had this mission-led government, which was talking about safer streets. It was talking about protecting the NHS, and you're sort of going public transport, tick, 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 tick. And then they get there. And then, the obvious things that would make a big difference, a fairly modest rail scheme such as Ely and Hawley junctions, for example, take hundreds of thousands of HGVs off the roads, massively improve freight and passenger transport. It's of the order of about £500 million, which is like a modest road scheme by today's standards. Yet it's been basically kicked into the long grass, while the government sort of says, yes, we're very supportive of freight on rail, it's really important, etc. Meanwhile, we'll approve the A66, we'll approve the Lower Thames Crossing smart motorway, all of these which are very long distance routes, which would be ideal for putting freight onto rail. It's subsidising more lorry movements. And so it sort of says one thing that it thinks people want to hear, but actually does the opposite. And that's a key part of the problem, really.
You're now leaving Transport Action Network. Is that in despair or in hope?
It's probably a bit of both in some respects. I think I think there was a big opportunity, and I think under Louise Haig we were extremely hopeful that there was a different approach being taken. The noises that Labour was saying when they came into government or before was really positive, and it was.
I think she got it, didn't she? I mean, I was very impressed with her, because at first you thought, I'm not sure she knows anything about this, but then she really seemed to learn on the job, and she got it. She understood, I think, your fundamental point about sustainable travel.
I think she did, and then as soon as she went, we suddenly seemed to do a handbrake turn and go in the opposite direction. So I think I won't be sad to be leaving that behind, because it has been quite a sort of an intense period. It was bad under the Conservatives because there didn't seem to be any, they weren't following the evidence. Again, we're talking about we're in a climate emergency and we need to tackle carbon emissions, and it was sort of, big road scheme, millions of tons of carbon it's going to generate, and it was, I'll give it a free pass. That doesn't matter. We'll make it up somewhere else. Well, and that still seems to be the case, unfortunately, even though transport is the biggest emitter of all of the emitters in the UK economy. And that's when we're even avoiding probably properly counting all the emissions associated with manufacturing private vehicles. But coming back to me, I mean, I hope to, I will still be around, and I will probably engage voluntarily. I'll still probably be supporting groups like the Queensbury Tunnel Society, because I mean, it's just an absolutely mad thing that National Highways is trying to.
Oh yeah,
If
that's
so.
blocking off this tunnel. I think it's near Bradford, isn't it? Which could be used as a cycle route and could be a real kind of amenity for local people, and yet they just want to shovel a lot of concrete in it and block it off forever. Yes, it's all that sort of stuff. Yes.
So I was probably still. That was. I mean, I was still going to be energized by those sorts of really stupid decisions, to want to sort of play a part. But I'll be able to do it in my own way, at my own pace, without sort of having all the responsibility of running an organisation, having to find the funding to keep it going, and sort of steering it and commentating and etc.
Oh well, good luck, Chris, in your new role. I'm sure you'll still be around and still batting for all these issues. And thank you very much for being on Calling All Stations.
Thank you for having me.
Here's Christian's final thought from the departure lounge.
Well, since we've been talking roads, I just offer a little very parochial thought about them, and to back up Chris Todd's point about the fact that we need to spend money on what we have, on improving it and maintenance, rather than always thinking of the next big scheme. And just almost outside my house, on a little road called Chambers Road, where I have to cycle to get home or leave home, the potholes are now so bad that I have to actually cycle on the wrong side of the road, where there is a bit of solid tarmac, to avoid ending up in hospital as a result of plunging into one of these potholes, which every time it rains, it gets worse. Complaints for the council have actually borne no fruit. And if ever you find that I'm no longer able to give this podcast, it might be because I've ended up in hospital thanks to those potholes.
Thank you for listening to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast with Christian Warmar, which is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please do consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on social media. You can find Cogitamus Limited, Calling All Stations podcast, Christian Warmar and Mark Walker across a variety of platforms, including LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky and X.